Hi, this is Kathy Lewis at Tall Tree Designs, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the yarn over. The yarn over is a technique we use to create an extra stitch, but at the same time it's a special increase because unlike other increase techniques, it leaves a hole, which is critical in lace knitting. You could say that lace knitting is built entirely around the yarn over. All of these holes that you see were created by using the yarn over. That makes the hole, it also adds a stitch. So a lace designer will strategically then decrease stitches on the same row to keep the stitch count the same, or to create direction and shaping in the lace itself. But today we're going to look at this yarn over, which is a deceptively simple little thing, but very critical to lace knitting. So I'm just going to knit a couple, and then I'm going to do my first yarn over. So I'm working in stocking stitch, I'm knitting across the right side of the work, my working yarn is in the back. To make a yarn over, I'm going to pull my working yarn between the needles to the front of the work, which is the same thing you would do if you were changing from a knit to a purl. But we're going to knit the next stitch. So now our yarn is in the front of the work. We bring it around the right side of the needle to wrap the yarn correctly around our needle to do a knit stitch. And that is going to create a hole. Okay, you won't see it so much until the next row, but let's do another one. So typically, if we were going to knit the next stitch, our yarn would be at the back of the work. We're going to pull it to the front, insert our needle to knit, and now in order to get our yarn to the back of the work where it needs to be, we have to wrap around the outside of the needle. And notice as I do that, what it's doing, this is creating the extra stitch on our needle, and continue to complete that stitch. So we've created this stitch, but there's nothing underneath anchoring it, and that's why you'll get a hole where you've done that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to purl back across the wrong side of our stocking stitch so we can get a better look at the results of our yarn over. Here is our yarn over that we did, and you can see it looks different from a regular stitch. It's quite loose, and I'm just going to purl into it the same way I did all of my other stitches. Here's the other one we made. Quite loose, not attached to anything underneath. Purl that. And when we look at that from the front, you can see we've created these two holes where those yarn overs were. There is a wrinkle. That looks simple enough, and I know it is simple. The one thing that sometimes throws people off is this. Let me just get past that first yarn over. So let's say I've reached this point in my pattern, and it's asking me to do a yarn over, but the next stitch is a purled stitch. So in this case, if I go ahead and purl that next stitch, you can see I'm not creating an extra stitch by just doing that. So if you're switching from a knit to a purl, or conversely from a purl to a knit on either side of a yarn over, you're going to do an extra step. So you bring your yarn forward, go around the right side of your needle to create that stitch, and back to the front where your yarn needs to be to do your purl. And the critical difference, see, there it is, there's our yarn over. We've created a stitch and we've created a hole. Can you see that? And that's what you need to keep in mind when you get to a point. So here, for example, I'm purling, and my next stitch is going to be a knit with a yarn over in between. I bring my yarn to the back, around the right side of the needle, and to the back again. I've created a stitch. My yarn is in the correct place for my knit stitch. So the way I tend to think of it is, if I'm not changing from knit to purl or purl to knit, I'm doing a yarn over. If I'm switching from knit to purl or purl to knit on the other side of that yarn over, in my head I think yarn around, to remind myself that I have to go around the needle and make sure I've created that extra stitch, because that's critical when you're knitting lace, that you end up with the correct number of stitches and the hole, which you won't get if you just pull the yarn to the other side of the work and complete the stitch. So that's a special case that you need to keep in mind, and a lot of patterns don't explain that. They just tell you knit, yarn over, purl, and if you try to do it the way you've learned, you may end up going terribly wrong. So bear that in mind, and you will have no problems knitting beautiful lace.